A first principles synthesis of human anatomy and physiology, the universe of the human body, as explored in this diverse collection of texts, from the accessible overviews like Anatomy and Physiology for Dummies to the rigorous depth of Guyton and Hall textbook of medical physiology, is built upon a surprisingly small set of fundamental irreducible principles. This long-tail summary, rooted in a first principles approach, discards specific details of organ systems for a moment and focuses on the universal foundational truths that govern life itself, structure and function at all levels of biological organization. These principles are the non-negotiable axioms from which all biological complexity arises. The principle of unity, form, dictates function. The most fundamental truth unifying all texts on anatomy and physiology is the principle of unity, which asserts an inseparable relationship. Form, anatomy, dictates function, physiology, and conversely, the necessities of function impose specific demands on form. This principle is often explicitly stated in titles like Anatomy and Physiology. The unity of form and function, it is the foundational axiom of the entire field. 1. The irreducible unit. The cell. The core structure underpinning this unity is the cell. Regardless of the complexity of the organism, be it a single-celled protozoa or the quadrillions of cells in a human, the cell is the minimum unit of life. All subsequent complexity in human anatomy is merely an aggregation, specialization, and hierarchical organization of these foundational units. Form. A cell is defined by its plasma membrane, a lipid bilayer that establishes a crucial boundary, separating the highly ordered internal environment, cytosol organelles, from the potentially chaotic external environment. The presence of this boundary is the structural prerequisite for life, enabling the maintenance of chemical gradients and energy storage. Function. The cell's primary irreducible function is homeostasis at its micro level. It must metabolize, convert energy and matter, replicate, ensure continuity, and respond to stimuli, maintain dynamic equilibrium. The form of its organelles, e.g., the folded membranes of the mitochondria maximizing surface area for ATP production, the compartmentalization by the endoplasmic reticulum for protein synthesis, is directly proportional to these specific functions. Hierarchy of organization. The complexity of the human organism emerges from the recursive application of the principle of unity across multiple scales, forming a strict hierarchy of organization. Chemical level, atoms, C, H, O, N, form molecules, water, proteins, lipids, carbohydrates. Cellular level, molecules assemble into organelles which are contained within the cell, the fundamental unit of life. Tissue level, similar cells cooperate to form tissues, epithelial, connective, muscular, nervous. This is where form begins to specialize for a macro function, e.g., epithelial tissue forms thin, selectively permeable barriers. Organ level, different tissues integrate to form organs, where multiple specific functions are united toward a larger goal, e.g., the stomach uses epithelial tissue for lining, muscular tissue for mixing, nervous tissue for control. Organ system level, groups of organs collaborate to perform essential, broad functions necessary for the survival of the entire organism, e.g., the digestive system. Organismal level, the integration of all 11 organ systems into a single, cohesive, self-regulating entity, the human being. This hierarchical structure is not arbitrary. It represents a logical and efficient distribution of labor, ensuring that specialized forms can execute specialized functions without compromising the stability of the whole. This is the anatomical blueprint, which every physiological process must respect. The principle of dynamic equilibrium, homeostasis. If the principle of unity describes the body's structure, the principle of dynamic equilibrium, or homeostasis, describes its purpose. Homeostasis is the most central concept in all physiology, explicitly covered in all advanced texts, and simplified in introductory materials. It is the ultimate, non-negotiable requirement for survival. The human body is fundamentally an open system constantly battling entropy and external forces to maintain an internal constancy, often referred to by Claude Bernard's term, milieu intérieur, internal environment. 1. The necessary condition, negative feedback loops. The core mechanism for achieving dynamic equilibrium is the negative feedback loop. This is the irreducible process of physiological regulation. It works on the principle of reversal. If a regulated variable deviates from its established set point, the control system initiates a response that opposes the original deviation, thus returning the variable to the set point. Components. Every negative feedback loop is composed of 3 essential elements. Receptor sensor detects the change, stimulus. Control center analyzes the information and determines the appropriate response, e.g., a specific area in the brain. Effector carries out the response, e.g., a gland, a muscle. Examples, such as the regulation of blood glucose or body temperature, are merely contextual variations of this single, universal regulatory structure. The entire field of physiological pathology, disease, can be defined as a breakdown or failure of one or more negative feedback mechanisms. 2. The exception. Positive feedback. Loops. While negative feedback ensures stability, the principle acknowledges the existence of the positive feedback loop, which is an exception that amplifies the initial change, driving the system away from the set point. Crucially, positive feedback is not a mechanism for long-term stability. Rather, it is a mechanism for a rapid, finite-term event that must be shut off by an external stimulus. Examples like blood clotting, childbirth, and the generation of an action potential, nerve impulse, illustrate its role in necessary, transient, and high-impact physiological events. The energy requirement, metabolism, and ATP, the dynamic nature of homeostasis demands a constant supply of energy to power the corrective and maintenance mechanisms. The energy currency of the body is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. The entire process of metabolism, the sum of all chemical reactions, is fundamentally reducible to the processes of breaking down complex molecules, catabolism, to release energy, which is then used to synthesize ATP and subsequently using ATP's energy, anabolism, to build, repair, and power cellular function, including active transport mechanisms critical for maintaining gradients. The ultimate first principle of energy utilization is the constant interconversion between potential and kinetic energy, specifically the breakdown of ATP-ADP plus BI to release usable energy. The principle of communication and integration for the trillions of specialized cells to function as a unified organism, there must be seamless, rapid, and precise communication and integration. This principle describes how the anatomical structures, nerves, glands, execute the homeostatic mandate. 1. The dual channels. Nervous and endocrine systems, communication in the human body, relies on 2 primary, fundamentally different, yet integrated, systems. Nervous system, characterized by speed, specificity, and short-duration effects. Its messages are electrochemical, action potentials, transmitted along dedicated fast pathways, neurons. The mechanism of signaling is the rapid release of a neurotransmitter into a tiny synapse, targeting a specific adjacent cell. This is the system of immediate control, reflexes, movement, thought. Endocrine system, characterized by slowness, broad effects, and long-duration effects. Its messages are chemical, hormones, transported via the general circulation, bloodstream. Hormones travel everywhere but only affect cells possessing the specific receptor, a principle known as target cell specificity. This is the system of long-term control, growth, development, metabolism, and mood. The foundation of integration is the hypothalamic pituitary axis, the physical and functional link between these 2 systems, demonstrating that even at the highest levels of regulation, The nervous and endocrine principles are inextricably linked to maintain overall organismal homeostasis. 2. The foundational signal, the action potential. The most fundamental, non-reducible form of communication in the nervous system is the action potential. This is the electrical signal itself. Its first principle is the transient, all or none reversal of the cell's membrane potential due to the rapid, controlled opening and closing of voltage-gated ion channels, specifically sodium, Na+, and potassium, K+ channels. The prerequisite for the action potential is the resting membrane potential, RMP, which is itself a first principle of cellular integrity. The RMP is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump, Na+ on K+ on text ATPase, which actively transports 3 Na+ ions out for every 2 K+ ions in, creating the necessary electrochemical gradient and ensuring the interior of the cell remains relatively negative 70 MeV. The RMP is stored potential energy, essential for excitability. The action potential is an information unit, a binary on-off signal. Information is encoded not by the magnitude of the signal, it's all or none, but by the frequency, rate of firing. 4. The principle of exchange and transport life requires constant interaction with the external environment, and every cell requires constant interaction with the internal environment. The body must acquire nutrients, digestion, distribute them, circulation, eliminate waste, excretion, and exchange gases, respiration. The entirety of the circulatory, respiratory, digestive, and renal urinary systems is a macro expression of the fundamental principle of exchange and transport. Point 1. The universal mechanism, diffusion and osmosis. At the most basic level, the movement of substances across cell membranes and throughout the interstitial fluid is governed by passive transport, processes that require no cellular energy, ATP. Diffusion. The movement of molecules from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. This is a purely physical process driven by the inherent random motion of molecules, thermal energy. Its foundational truth is the tendency of matter to seek a state of maximum entropy. Every physiological exchange, oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange in the lungs and tissues, nutrient absorption in the gut, is ultimately reliant on this concentration gradient. Osmosis. A specific type of diffusion, the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane from an area of lower solute concentration, higher water concentration, to an area of higher solute concentration, lower water concentration. The control of water distribution, which is essential for maintaining cell volume and blood pressure, is dictated by the osmotic potential of solutes, primarily Na+ and proteins. The concept of tonicity, isotonic, hypotonic, hypertonic, is the practical application of this principle. 2. The circulatory mandate. Bulk flow. While diffusion governs movement over microscopic distances, the needs of a large, multicellular organism necessitate bulk flow to move substances rapidly over macroscopic distances. This is the irreducible function of the cardiovascular system. The pump, heart, generates the pressure differential necessary to initiate bulk flow, overcoming resistance in the vessels. The medium, blood, a specialized connective tissue that acts as the universal transport medium for gases, nutrients, hormones, waste, and immune components. The distribution network, vessels, a closed circuit that distributes the medium under pressure. Crucially, the capillaries are the anatomical sites where the exchange principle, diffusion, intersects with the transport principle, bulk flow, by having walls thin enough for efficient diffusion. The integration of the respiratory system, gas exchange, and the renal system, fluid-on-ion balance, waste excretion, can be viewed as specialized capillary exchange networks designed to maintain the necessary chemical gradients in the blood, ensuring the efficiency of the universal transport system. The principle of contraction and movement, the ability to move both internally, blood, food, cellular components, and externally, locomotion, is fundamental to survival and interaction with the environment. All movement is reducible to the principle of contraction. 1. The cellular machine, actin and myosin at its core, movement is generated by the interaction of two specific protein filaments, actin, thin filament, and myosin, thick filament. This is the universal contractile machinery present in all muscle types, skeletal, cardiac, smooth. Mechanism, sliding filament theory. Contraction occurs when the myosin heads bind to sites on the actin filaments and cyclically pull the thin filaments past the thick filaments, causing the functional unit of the muscle, the sarcomere, to shorten. The regulator, calcium, Ca2+. The trigger for this interaction is always a rise in the intracellular concentration of calcium ions. Ca2+ binds to regulatory proteins, e.g., troponin in striated muscle, that shift the position of blocking proteins, e.g., tropomyosin, thus exposing the binding sites on the actin filament. The difference between a rapid skeletal muscle contraction, the sustained rhythmic beat of the heart, and the slow, sustained contraction of smooth muscle in the gut is merely a difference in the regulation and sourcing of the Ca2+ signal, not the contractile machinery itself. 2. The skeletal mandate. Support and protection anatomy provides the necessary scaffolding for the physiological principle of movement. The skeletal system acts as the fundamental support structure, providing leverage. Bones act as rigid levers upon which muscles, the effectors of contraction, can pull, transforming microscopic cellular shortening into macroscopic body movement. Protection. Hard, immovable structures, e.g., skull, ribcage, protect the most critical, least replaceable organs, brain, heart, lungs. Storage and production. Bones also act as a physiological reservoir for the critical mineral calcium, essential for contraction and signaling, and house the hematopoietic tissues responsible for producing blood cells, principle of transport. The principle of continuity and adaptation. The final overarching principle is the requirement for the organism not only to survive in the present, homeostasis, but to ensure the survival of its kind, reproduction, and to maintain its functional integrity over time, adaptation, and repair. This speaks to the concepts explored in texts focusing on development, genetics, and the structure of human imperfection, like human errors. 1. The mandate of reproduction. The most fundamental principle of biological life is reproduction, the creation of new individuals to ensure the continuity of the species. All reproductive anatomy and physiology, gamete formation, hormonal cycles, fertilization, gestation, is a sophisticated implementation of two core, irreducible genetic principles. Meiosis, the process of cell division that reduces the chromosome number by half, ensuring that when two gametes fuse, the resulting zygote has the correct full complement of chromosomes. This also introduces genetic variation through recombination. Inheritance. The passing of genetic instructions, DNA, encoded in the chromosomes, which acts as the blueprint for the entire anatomical and physiological structure of the offspring. Principle of unity. 2. The immune mandate, self versus non-self. The body's survival is constantly threatened by external pathogens and internal malfunctions. The immune system is the expression of the principle of defense, the ability to distinguish self from non-self. This distinction is a non-negotiable requirement for homeostasis. Innate immunity, nonspecific. The first line of defense, a rapid, generalized response, e.g., inflammation, phagocytosis. Its function is based on recognizing broad molecular patterns common to pathogens. Adaptive immunity, specific. The highly sophisticated learned response that involves memory. This system generates highly specific antibodies and T cells to target a specific previously encountered antigen, providing long-term protection. The ability to learn and remember a specific threat is the ultimate physiological expression of adaptation at the organismal level. True. Tissue renewal and repair even. In the adult organism, the principle of continuity is evident through the constant process of tissue renewal and repair. Cells and tissues are constantly damaged, aged, or lost, e.g., epithelial cells in the gut, blood cells. Stem cells. The existence of various types of stem cells, unspecialized progenitor cells, in key tissues ensures that specialized, non-dividing cells, like neurons or highly differentiated muscle cells, can be replaced or repaired by the division and subsequent differentiation of these less specialized precursors. This regenerative capacity is the physiological countermeasure to wear, tear, and entropic decay. The collective understanding across all these texts, from the rudimentary to the highly specialized, is that the human body is not a static machine, but a dynamic, self-regulating, and self-replicating system defined by these foundational, irreducible principles. Every anatomical structure exists to support a specific physiological function, and every function is ultimately an effort to maintain the dynamic equilibrium necessary for the continuity of life. The study of anatomy and physiology is, therefore, the study of how form and function eternally and successfully cooperate under the relentless mandate of survival.